Is February our most romantic month? I ask you, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Many of us stuck in lockdown don't have the chance for much romance. Maybe you might be in lockdown with your lover, having a wonderful time. I hope so. But many people won't be. They will be turning to fiction for romance, which is a fantastic idea. And I'd love to know, what are your favourite fictional kinds of romance? What types of books do you turn to when you're looking for romantic literature? There's so many different kinds of romance in literature, and also so many different things that we are looking for when we turn to romance in novels. Do send me in your thoughts and messages, because I'd love to know what your particular favourites are. Hi, Ollie, it's great to see you. And I wonder if you've got any favourite particular romantic novels. There is always Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, one of my favourites that I talk about frequently. And Ollie, I know you love that too. Thanks for all the people joining me on Instagram too. It's great to see you here this evening. And I think that romantic literature is a fantastic topic. There's so many amazing romances that I'm going to be talking about tonight. So I'm very excited to share you lots of romantic thoughts with you this evening. So one first question is, what do we actually turn to romance in fiction for? I think we're looking for escape, we're looking for passion, we're looking for happy endings. We might be looking for enduring love, marriage, long term love. Also, many people will be enjoying reading about doomed love, because doomed love is often the most fun to read about, let's face it, even if you know it's doomed. But then there's also doomed love, which ultimately wins out. And that's probably my favourite kind of romantic literature, when you sense absolute desperation and feel that no one's ever going to win their love, but in the end they do, and that's the most satisfying kind of book, many would say. So I started thinking about what we look for in romance, not just in literature but in life. So I turned to Marie Claire, that magazine which often provides us the answers to such questions. And Marie Claire had lots of good ideas about what we're looking for in romance at the moment and how we can still be romantic in lockdown. And I'm going to think about those ideas and then apply literature to those ideas, because I thought that would be a good way of tackling the topic this evening. So Marie Claire says that one of the things that we're doing in order to find romance in lockdown is to write letters. Writing letters is an incredibly romantic thing to do. And many of you, I believe, are writing letters. I hope that you might be trying that, because it is a lovely way to spend time in lockdown and to write to your loved ones. And if you haven't tried it yet, please do. There are many fantastic letter writing scenes in literature, and I'm going to share a couple of them with you this evening before moving on to the next topic. One of my favourite uh, letter writing moments is in One Day by David Nicholls, when many of you might know this story. It's all about um, star-crossed lovers, or are they doomed lovers, who are Dexter and Emma, who we meet once a year on St. Swithin's Day, and we hear about how they're getting on. And one of the first chapters is when they actually get together, but then the next 20 years is the times that they come together and come apart again. And it's all incredibly frustrating and brilliant. Um, and I'm just going to read you a bit of the letter that's in One Day, which I think is one of the most gorgeous letters in literature. And David Nicholls was actually referring to Thomas Hardy when he thought of the letter, and I'll be talking about Thomas Hardy too in a minute. So here, Dexter is in India and he's been missing Emma, and that's why he writes the letter. The thing is, running back to the hostel in the rain just now, the rain is warm here, hot even sometimes, not like London rain. I was, like I said, pretty drunk, and I found myself thinking about you and thinking about what a shame Em isn't here to see this, to experience this. And I had this revelation, and it's this: you should be here with me, Em, in India. And so the letter continues, and it's a really gorgeous letter in which Dexter tells Emma that he's going to send her the money for her to come and join him in India. And it's incredibly romantic and beautiful. And then he tucks the letter into a Thomas Hardy novel, which he's been carrying around with him while he's in India, and accidentally leaves it behind in the hostel that he's staying in. Patricia, thanks for mentioning that you also love that letter. I think you're talking about One Day, one of my favorite romantic novels. It's so agonizing and brilliant. And this letter moment is one of the most agonizing and brilliant moments because he pours out all his feelings, writes this fantastic letter, and then slips it into a novel and loses it. And the letter is then found by another backpacker. And I'm just going to read you about the finding of the letter because it's such a Hardy-esque moment, which I know David Nicholls was really enjoying being a hideously Hardy-esque moment. Tucked between the ragged foam cushions was a copy of Howard's End. Sorry, it wasn't Thomas Hardy, it was Howard's End. A letter tucked into the opening pages. Even though it was intended for someone else, she felt an automatic thrill of anticipation at the red and white trim of the airmail envelope. She tugged the letter out, read it to the end, then read it again. Heidi's English wasn't particularly strong, and some words were unfamiliar. Discursion, for example, but she understood enough to recognize this as a letter of some importance. The kind of letter that she would like to receive herself one day. Not quite a love letter, but near enough. She pictured this M person reading it, then rereading it, exasperated, but a little pleased too, and she imagined her acting upon it, walking out of her terrible flat and the rotten job and changing her life. Heidi imagined Emma Morley, who looked not unlike herself, waiting at the Taj Mahal as a handsome blonde man approached. She imagined a kiss, and Heidi began to feel a little happier. She decided that, whatever happened, Emma Morley must receive this letter. But there was no address on the envelope and no return address for Dexter either. She scanned the pages for clues. The name of the restaurant where Emma worked, perhaps, but there was nothing of use. She resolved to ask at the reception of the hostel over the road. This was, after all, the best that she could do. Heidi Schindler is Heidi Klaus now, 41 years old. She was 23 then when she read that letter. She lives in a suburb of Frankfurt with a husband and 4 children and is reasonably happy, certainly happier than she expected to be at 23. The paperback copy of Howard's End is still on the shelf in the spare bedroom, forgotten and unread, with the letter tucked neatly just inside the cover, next to an inscription in small, careful handwriting that reads, "To dear Dexter, a great novel for your journey. Travel well and return safely with no tattoos. Be good, or as good as you are able. Bloody hell, I'll miss you. All my love, your good friend, Emma Morley, Clapton, London, April 1990. She never got the letter, and thus her life was completely changed. If only she had got that letter, she would probably have got together with Dexter a lot sooner. And this is one of the brilliantly frustrating and great letters to be found in literature. When David Nicholls wrote it, he did say that he actually wanted to make a nod to Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles, because Tess also writes a very important letter, which she sends to Angel Clare, her husband to be just before they are to be married, in which she confesses her disastrous love affair with Alec d'Urberville. But because Angel never gets that letter, her life too is irrevocably changed. It's all unbearably frustrating, but brilliant. Also, other great and important love letters in literature. The one that's come up most frequently that people have been mentioning on Twitter to me when I put it out there to ask, what are your favourite romantic novels in literature? Persuasion by Jane Austen has a very important, brilliant, and significant letter in it too. And it's when Anne, uh, who is the heroine, and Wentworth have been skirting around each other for the last 8 years and not getting together. They're actually in the same room, and Wentworth is writing a love letter to Anne, which she doesn't realise. It's all unbearably frustrating and a brilliant piece of writing, because we are literally on tenterhooks in total agony waiting for the revelation of what Wentworth is writing to Anne, and we have no idea whether he's going to confess his love or not. And it's only when Anne finally gets the letter and reads it that we realise that their love can indeed be real. So Jane Austen is also a brilliant and fabulous writer who uses the device of the letter in her romantic fiction. So do ponder that in your own lives, whether you might want to write more letters. Let's all go back to writing letters. Surely it's the way ahead. Another wonderful and lovely novel which uses letters is The Colour Purple by Alice Walker, which is an amazing and brilliant book in many ways. And it is also a love story. And it's a love story between kind of partly two sisters, you could say, and also it's a love story between Celie, who's the heroine of the book, and Shug, who is an incredibly glamorous, wonderful singer. And Celie and Shug slowly move towards each other over the course of the book. Most of the letters in the book are actually written to God by Celie, but there's also letters written to between the two sisters. And The Colour Purple is another wonderful love story, which I would very much say you must read, which has a lot of other big issues going on in it to do with abuse, sexual abuse, rape, and being a person of colour. And it's a really brilliant read, which people don't always remember is also a love story. So it is a romantic read too. Letters can also be fraught with difficulties in other ways in literature. And thanks to Sam Hart for reminding me about the brilliantly terrible Valentine sending moment in Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. Uh, this is a truly terrible moment because Bathsheba Everdeen, who's the heroine of the book, decides on a whim to send a Valentine's card to the amazingly sensible suitor of hers called Lockwood. Bathsheba was just about to send a kind of innocent, flirtatious Valentine to a younger boy just as a joke, but she's persuaded by a friend to actually send a Valentine to Lockwood instead. And the Valentine, would you believe it, actually says, "Marry me" on it. Who could be more obvious than that, you would think, in sending a Valentine? But the problem is with Bathsheba is that it's a complete joke. She's actually a very vain woman who loves attention. She loves being the center of attention. She's a wonderful farmer. She could be called a feminist of her day. The book is set in the Industrial Revolution, and Bathsheba is becoming a pretty impressive woman in her own right. And she has three suitors throughout the book who are the handsome Sergeant Troy, the very sensible Boldwood, who is a rich landowner, and the honest, reliable, and romantic Gabriel Oak. And Bathsheba makes this terrible mistake on Valentine's Day of sending Boldwood a Valentine card saying that she wants to marry him. And he takes it deeply seriously, puts the card up in his room. It's a very beautiful and ornate card. And he really believes that Bathsheba means it, when really she was just playing around. And this leads into terrible complications for Bathsheba and Boldwood and Troy and Gabriel Oak, and has a long lasting effect on all of them. So beware the missent letter, particularly the missent Valentine's card. You definitely have to watch the letters that you're writing when you're living in a romantic novel. And Bathsheba definitely lives to regret it. However, it is a really lovely book in which the best man wins. So anyone that hasn't yet read Far from the Madding Crowd, I would totally recommend that as a romantic novel. It is a hardy novel, so it is quite long. It has many descriptive passages about the beautiful countryside of Wessex, but it's highly satisfying. It has wonderful character descriptions, and we're definitely all rooting for one of the three suitors. I won't give away which one it is. And I would highly recommend that as a romantic novel. I think it ticks all the boxes of what we're hoping for from romance in our books. So, for people that are joining late, hi, Bill and Jenny. Great to see you here. I'm taking aspects of romance as recommended by the magazine Marie Claire and talking about how we can apply them to literature. So, for instance, Marie Claire suggests that it's a great idea to write more letters to our loved ones and our lovers at this time of lockdown. Another suggestion from the same article about romance is to pick wild flowers on the way home to visiting your lover. Obviously, not everyone can do that in lockdown because they might not be living with their lover, but therefore, that's a great reason to turn to fiction instead, because you can do it through the virtual world of the novel. So if you can't pick flowers and bring them home to your lover, I urge you to read Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier, which I think is the literary equivalent of picking flowers and bringing them home for your lover, because it's all about a man on a very, very, very long journey home to his lover through an incredible landscape where he witnesses many of the wonders of nature. It's a classic story of love and devotion set against the backdrop of the American Civil War. And it's about a Confederate soldier, W.P. Inman, who deserts his unit and travels to the South in order to be reunited with his love, Ada. On his way, he has a huge amount of adventures, and it's such a romantic and beautiful book. I would really urge you all to read it. And I would say that it's the literary equivalent of a long walk home carrying a bunch of flowers, because he's metaphorically carrying that bunch of flowers, even though he can't literally do it because he has to walk over many months and several hundred miles. And on his way, he has to survive, kill goats, fight off marauders, and tackle many, many difficulties. But it is a deeply romantic book, and I won't give away the ending. Another one which comes to mind of a similar ilk, which I feel is another literary equivalent of the carrying a bunch of flowers to your lover back from a walk, is The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Frye by Rachel Joyce, which is an amazingly romantic and wonderful book with a slightly unexpected, different kind of romance to the Charles Frazier that I was just mentioning. It's a story in which Harold Frye, recently retired, who lives in a small English rural village with his wife Maureen, receives a letter from a woman that he used to be in love with called Queenie Hennessy. And in this letter, she reveals that she's in a hospice and she's knows that she's dying and she's writing to say goodbye. And she's in this hospice in Berwick upon Tweed. So Harold writes her a reply and walks to the postbox to post his reply wearing his slippers, not dressed for a long journey. But when he gets to the postbox, he has an epiphany that he must actually deliver this letter by hand. And he decides to walk all the way from where he lives, which is in Kingsbridge, to the hospice in Berwick upon Tweed, which is 600 miles, because he believes that as long as he's walking, Queenie Hennessy will stay alive. And isn't that the most romantic thing you've ever heard? It's a really gorgeous, lovely, positive, uplifting book. And it's full of beautiful thoughts, beautiful moments while Harold Frye is on his pilgrimage. He meets many people. He doesn't have any money with him. He has to make do and improvise. His wife starts to miss him for the first time in years. And there's actually a companion book uh, from Queenie Henderson's point of view as well, which is also a really lovely read. So both of those would be fantastic books to read for a bit of romance and for the literary equivalent of bringing a bunch of flowers home to your lover. Another suggestion from Marie Claire for what you should do to be romantic in lockdown is to snuggle together on a rainy day. So, if I'm applying that to bibliotherapy, my suggestion would be that you should share a good book with your lover or your partner. And you can share that by reading it at the same time, so you both have your own copy, or you could share it by reading aloud to each other, which is something that I frequently advocate as a bibliotherapist to adults as well as reading aloud to children, because it's a great way to spend time together. It's very intimate, it's very generous, both of the reader being generous with their time and their voice, and the listener being very generous with their listening attention to the reader. Or they could share the book over Zoom or Skype as well. You could be reading aloud to each other. Or you could be just reading in tandem. So, one of the books that I would suggest as a brilliant book to read aloud together or to read concurrently with each other is a deeply romantic book, The Go Between by Lp Hartley, which many of you may know as it's a bit of an English classic. It has been turned into a film, and it is a great film, but read the book. And it's all set in a heat wave in 1901, and it's about love between the classes. It's about a 19-year-old aristocratic girl who falls for a groundsman, and they have a boy of 12 who is their go-between, who takes their love letters or their letters of assignation between them. And the boy, whose name is Leo, is the one that's writing the book. He starts the book with the famous phrase, "The past is another country." And he then tells the story of what happened on that fateful summer of 1901. And it's a really page turning, gripping novel, which is absolutely brilliant to read either to yourself or to read with your lover or to read aloud together, because it really is completely gripping and every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. So I would very much urge you to read that for its own romance, but also for the fact that it's a romantic thing to do, to read it together. So that's me thinking about snuggling together on a rainy day. The bibliotherapy aspect of that is to share books together and to read aloud together. Marie Claire also suggests buying a box of chocolates for your loved one as a romantic gesture, or cooking a chocolatey pudding. And my literary equivalent of a box of chocolates, actually, I've got two. Um, so, first, I want to tell you about Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel, which is a box of chocolates of a book, because it's a very sumptuously written magic realist kind of book, all about a woman who is incredibly frustrated in love, and she puts all of her passion, love and desire into her cooking. So this book was written in 1989, and it became the best-selling novel in Mexico over the next 5 years, selling millions of copies. And it was then made into a film, which was also immensely successful. It's got 12 chapters, and each chapter begins with a recipe, so you can also follow the recipes, which is really fun. The title refers to the temperature of water when you add it to chocolate to melt chocolate to make hot chocolate. So it's a culinary idea in itself. And the story is all about Tita De La Garza, the youngest daughter living in Mexico in a family at the turn of the 20th century. Tita falls in love with Pedro, and he comes to the ranch to ask for her hand in marriage. But her mother refuses to let Tita marry the love of her life, Pedro, because by family tradition, she is expected to stay at home and look after her mother. And she is forced to do that. But she then spends the rest of the novel putting her pent up love, desire, and frustration into the things that she cooks. One of the times that she cooks soup, one of her sisters is so overcome by the passion and desire that goes into the soup that her sister actually runs off and elopes with the man that she's been fancying for the last few months. There's many fantastic meals described: quail in rose petal sauce, which are flavored with erotic thoughts, many wonderful soups and puddings and desserts. And it's a great fun novel to read for all these recipes and for the incredible yearning and passion within the book. And you'll be glad to hear that love goes beyond the grave in this book, which is another wonderful theme in romantic fiction, which many of us love to discover. Uh, there's a wonderful scene in the book which doesn't give too much away, when the whole house where Tita's been living is burnt to cinders, and the only thing that survives is the cookbook that she's been putting all her amazing recipes into. And I think that is very much a symbol of quite how romantic this book is, and it is absolutely gorgeous. So the other box of chocolates equivalent that I was going to mention in literary terms is this wonderful book, Love in Colour by Bolu Babalola, which was only just published in 2021, which is a really wonderful, rich box of chocolates of a book. Another one, which I must say would be fantastic to read aloud and to share with your romantic partner, because each story is a really great length. They're not particularly long, so each story would probably only take about 20 minutes, half an hour to read, which I think is about the perfect length. And these stories are all based on a mixture of classic tales from mythology from Greece and Rome and from Africa. And all of these stories are retold with a modern slant. And they're very feminist and also very inspiring and upbeat and positive. And when you think that you're going to be reading lots of stories which relate to classical myths, you might think that they're going to be full of doom and gloom, misogyny, and women generally having a bad time, because that does tend to be what happens in lots of the mythological tales of yore. However, Bolu Babalola tells these stories, the stories of Scheherazade, Psyche, Atem, Yah, Sia, Nefertiti, Xenu, Thisbe, with very unexpected, brilliant, and different endings and different aspects to them as you go along. I'm going to read you a couple of bits out of her book because it's quite a revelation. It's a delight, and I feel it really is a bit of a box of chocolates of a book. Excuse me while I have a little sip of my romantic potion. I love Bolu Babalola's introduction to this book because in it she states her intentions for this romantic set of stories, which I'm going to share with you because it will, I think, make you really want to rush out and get this book to share with your partner or to read to yourself and to remember to believe in love in all its many forms. To say that I love love would probably be akin to me saying that I'm quite fond of inhaling oxygen. Love is the prism through which I view the world. I truly believe it binds and propels us. This isn't a naive denial of the darkness that we know exists in the world. Rather, it is a refusal to allow the devastation, the horror of the heartache, to consume us. It is affirming the knowledge that there is light. Love is that light. Romance sweetens the casual bitterness we can encounter. It heightens the mundane and makes the terrestrial supernatural. The time it takes for two pairs of lips to meet could be milliseconds, but it can feel as if time has stretched indefinitely. You are transposed into a different world, your own world, just for you and the one who holds your affection. It makes you uniquely aware of both your body and spirit. It grounds you and it raises you up. Love enriches the world we inhabit. In this book, I have had the honour and privilege of exploring how the power of love has been expressed within a variety of cultures from around the world. I pay homage to the textures of each original tale, while also adapting them to fit a new modern age. In doing this, I hoped to draw out and excavate what these stories can teach us about ourselves and love itself. My personal mission was to highlight how love and affection is magnificently multidimensional, both universal and deeply personal. Its expression is nuanced, diverse, and complicated as humanity itself. Love is tender, tentative, brutal, and bold. It's messy and magic. It can be the most frightening thing in the world, purely because it feels like safety, and that safety is reliant on total trust in another, with whom we share our hearts, expose ourselves, and allow ourselves to be seen for exactly who we are. But when we allow ourselves to trust like this, there is a freedom that we can attain, a glory. The book This book is about being seen in all your iterations, in every dynamic, brightly and in colour. It's about the joy and hope that accompanies the celebration of that phenomenon. I hope that this book brings you joy. I love that introduction to this beautiful, gorgeous, and eternally surprising book. And I think it's the one I've most recently discovered as it has only just been published. And I'm very excited to share it with you this evening. and it really is a box of chocolates of a book. I'm going to read you a little bit from the first story. And Patricia, thanks for enthusing about that and saying that you're going to read it, because I think it's a really lovely book to share with your partner. And also, it's a great book to read if you're single too. But it is incredibly romantic, all about different kinds of love. And it's very positive, which many romantic books aren't necessarily. So I'm going to read you a little bit of the first story just to give you a sense of the flavour of the writing. Austen was used to being looked at, in awe, lasciviously, curiously. Instinctively, she knew when eyes were drawing across her, trying to figure out what they could from her figure. Chin slightly raised, arms and legs lean and athletic, and wide hips that swayed and exuded a femininity so innate it refused to be contained. To some it was a call they felt they had to respond to others a declarative statement of power, something to fear, revere. As a competitive swimmer at IFA Academy, she had an intrinsic allure that followed her as she flew into the air before diving into the pool. Prize-winning, majestic, her limbs flew through chemicalized water, as if it was the sea and she was the current itself, the energy itself, the gravity from the moon itself. She transformed the pool into a sun-dappled lake. Though she moved with incisive swiftness, she made her preternatural ability look breezy. It was a casual magnificence. She pushed and pulled as if she was conjuring power from the water. Those who watched often mused that it seemed as if the water only existed to propel her. What I love about this book is that each story is very different. Some are set in the UK, some are set in Africa, some are set in unknown mythological places, but each one is completely different, and every single one surprised me and slightly blew my mind as I was reading it. And I was also constantly surprised by the positivity within the stories. Some of them do have moments of sadness and tragedy, being romantic stories, but there's something really lovely, positive, and colourful about these great stories. So, thinking about the premise of this evening, which was romantic ideas, I started with a list of thoughts from the magazine Marie Claire about how to be romantic in lockdown. And we've talked about writing letters, we've talked about bringing flowers home, and we've talked about bringing home a box of chocolates or equivalent. And I've given you the literary equivalents of them. And I will post all of these on Instagram and Facebook later so you can catch up if you've missed anything. Another way of being romantic is to share stories of undying passion. And I briefly touched on the idea of love continuing beyond the grave in Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel. Another story, a great romantic novel which describes love beyond the grave, is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I think we can't have an evening of romantic fiction without mentioning Wuthering Heights, which is an amazingly passionate and romantic book about Catherine and Heathcliff's passion for one another, which is the centre of this story. It's really quite a complex romance and story of love, which, when you read the bare bones of the story to yourself, you might think is somewhat lacking in positivity, joy, and happiness. But when you read it, you're completely swept up in the passion of Catherine and Heathcliff. And I would say it's a must read for anyone wanting a bit of romance in their lives. So do turn to Wuthering Heights for the two parallel love stories between Catherine and Heathcliff and Catherine's daughter, Catherine, and her love, Hareton. And those two stories interweave with each other throughout the book. But that is a wonderful book in which you do see love going beyond the grave. So, being conscious of time and worrying that I'm not going to fit in all my fantastic topics, I'm going to speed on with the idea of adventure. So, another aspect of romantic fiction is to be whisked away on an adventure. It's also something that came into the Marie Claire article. If you can whisk your lover away on a romantic escape, then that's what you would want to do. However, most of us can't do that at the moment due to the world being in lockdown. So you'll have to go on a romantic escape via a book. One of the best people to take you on such an adventure is Louis Lamour, who is one of the greatest romantic writers ever. He wrote 101 books. They're mostly westerns, and he has sold millions of copies. He's incredibly popular still. He wrote this book, Hondo, the one I'm going to tell you about a little bit, in 1953, which was originally a short story. It was made into a film starring John Wayne, and he then adapted that short story and film into a longer novel. And it is one of his best stories, and it's a great read. I'll read you a little bit of it, and you'll get an idea of what kind of writer Louis Lamour is. He's describing the hero. He was a man etched by the desert's howling winds, a big, broad-shouldered man who knew the ways of the Apache and ways of staying alive. She was a woman raising a young son on her own on a remote Arizona ranch. And between Hondo Lane and Angie Low was the warrior Vitoro, whose people were preparing to rise against the white men. Now the pioneer woman, the gunman, and the Apache warrior are caught in a drama of love, war, and honor. That was the description of the book, and here's just a little bit of a quote from the book. Louis Lamour is a really fun read. You know where you are with him. They're westerns, they're passionate, they're rugged, they're possibly a bit dated, possibly a little bit misogynistic, but they are great reads. Destat, how musical. What does it mean? You can't say it except in Mescalero. It means morning, but that isn't what it means either. Indian words are more than just that. They also mean the feel and the sound of the name. It means the crack of dawn, the first bronze light that makes the butt stand out against the grey desert. It means the first sound you hear of a brook curling over some rocks, some trout jumping and a beaver crooning. It means the sound of a stallion that a stallion makes when he whistles at some mares just as the first puff of wind kicks up at daybreak. It means like you get up in the first light and you and her go out of the wicky up where it smells smoky and private and just you and her and kind of safe with just the two of you there, and you stand outside and smell the first bite of the wind coming down from the high divide and promising the first snowfall. Well, you just can't say what it means in English. Anyway, that was her name, Destat. So that's a little glimpse of a typical Louis L'Amour moment. And I think he is really great for an adventure. Another great adventure writer, full of romance and lots of wonderful adventures, is Diana Gabaldon. And thank you to Colleen, who I think is here this evening, for reminding me and alerting me to the joy of Outlander, which is a collection of 9 books, which has also been turned into a successful TV series with 5 seasons. Enormously popular, selling millions of copies. And I asked why we love Outlander, and I think the answer is that it's, well, there's many answers because there's so many readers, but it's a mixture of time travel because the heroine of the story goes back in time into Scotland, into the 19th century Scotland, and meets all sorts of wonderful Scottish folk from that era. And she's from modern times, but she's gone back into time and she falls in love with a man in the 19th century. It's set in Scotland, which is also obviously a great thing. The Scottish landscape, the Scottish accent, the Scottish men and women. There are sword fights and there's archaic medicine, which is always fun too. It's got a lot of great things going for it. So, people that haven't read Outlander by Diana Gabaldon, you are in for a treat with some fantastically romantic reading. And thanks to Colleen for bringing that to my attention. Another thing that Marie Claire mentions in the article all about what we should be getting out of romance, if possible, is trying out new things sexually. And you can find ideas and possible directions to go in the book Permission by Saskia Vogel, published in 2019, which is all set in Hollywood. And the heroine is a young actress called Echo, who's 25. We might slightly get some resonances from the name Echo, thinking about the story of Echo and Narcissus, very much a Hollywood kind of vibe, thinking about narcissism. And Echo is an actress who's possibly slightly on the shelf now that she's 25. Is she past her maximum time of promotability? And she gets involved with a sadomasochistic relationship. There, she becomes part of a kind of love triangle, and it's a very intriguing, complex, and interesting situation involving sadomasochism and self-loathing. Echo unfortunately witnesses an accident that results in her father's death, and she's highly confused. So that's a really interesting book to have a look at as well. Permission, by Saskia Vogel. Then another direction to go in romantic fiction right now is to think about and remember your first love. So that's something that came up in the article all about romance in the Marie Claire article, which was saying, think again about your first love, and it will take you back to how you felt when you first fell in love with your current partner. So that is a lovely thought. And there's a few great first love books, which I'm just going to mention. Coffee Will Make You Black by April Sinclair, written in 1994, is a really brilliant coming of age novel set in San Francisco, which is about a girl coming to terms with her sexuality and thinking about being black. And it has a sequel also called Ain't Gonna Be the Same Fool Twice, which also deals with aspects of sexuality and discovering your sexuality. Both of these books have elements of first love, and they're very energetic, effervescent novels, which are really fun reads. Another one that I love as a great first love book is Annie on My Mind by Nancy Garden, which was a groundbreaking book when it came out in 1982, because it's about a lesbian relationship which has a happy ending. Hooray! And Nancy Garden said that she wrote it partly as a response to the novel The Well of Loneliness, because The Well of Loneliness is actually a rather depressing novel about lesbian love, which does not have a happy ending. Whereas Annie on My Mind, although the two heroines go through many trials and tribulations, without giving too much away, it does have an upbeat and positive ending. And it's a really lovely book. And I think it's one of the ones that best describes what it is like to fall in love for the first time. Um, Another one which I think is a fantastic read is Jeanette Winterson's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, which is also a story of first love, and describes the fictional heroine very close to Jeanette Winterson's heart, a girl who's growing up in a highly religious household, and she falls in love with a girl. Her mother tries to exorcise her demons, and it's all pretty intense, but a great novel. Jeanette Winterson also wrote a lovely book recently called Frankenstein, which is a really fun read and a love story, again, which tells the story of a transgender doctor called Frye, who's falling in love with Victor Stein, a celebrated professor who's leading the public debate around AI and carrying out his experiments of his own in a vast underground network of tunnels. It's a very typical Jeanette Winterson kind of novel, which is quite complex and intertwined, but a really fun read and a love story. Quite a rollicking, hilarious, humorous kind of book, which we haven't really touched on, is also an important aspect of the romantic novel. Books that have humour in them are very welcome, particularly at this time during lockdown when we all need a bit of upbeat, positive bibliotherapy. Pack a sunset picnic is another piece of advice of what to do with your significant other. And if you can't actually go on a picnic at dusk with your significant other, you could read about it in a novel instead. And I've got two brilliant equivalents of the going on a picnic with your loved one. One is Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh, because there are picnic scenes in that novel. It's a gorgeous book to read anyway, and intensely romantic, but a different kind of romance, because it's a kind of romance which is unrequited mostly, but is full of incredibly romantic, gorgeous, beautiful scenes. So I'll just read you a tiny bit of the picnic scene that I'm thinking of in Brideshead Revisited. I've got a motor car and a basket of strawberries and a bottle of Chateau Perrigue, which isn't a wine you've ever tasted, so don't pretend. It's heaven with strawberries. They seek some shade and find a sheep-cropped knoll under a clump of elms, where they ate the strawberries, drank the wine, and looked up at the trees. So that's a story in which Charles Ryder and Sebastian Flight meet at Oxford. Sebastian is a alcoholic aristocrat who knows how to party, and Charles is much more sensible. And it's about their story, the various adventures that they go on. And it is, I feel, a bit like going on a picnic, because it's full of wonderful tastes and flavours, and the actual writing is a delight. Another book which you could say is a bit like going on a picnic is the beautiful and gorgeous Call Me By Your Name by Andre Ackerman, which has also been made into a highly successful and popular film. It was written in 2007. It's quite short, it's a novella, and it's all about two boys falling in love, aged about 17. It's set around the relationship between an intellectually precocious and curious 17-year-old American Italian Jewish boy called Elio and a visiting 24-year-old American Jewish scholar called Oliver. It's set in 1980s Italy, and it's an amazingly intense and erotic novel, which does have aspects of The Picnic taking place in it quite a lot. There's a huge amount of leisure time when the both boys just float around sunbathing, flicking flies away, stretching their limbs. They're always wearing shorts, they're always eating peaches. It's all very beautiful and picnicky and sunny and gorgeous. There's a wonderful concept of leisure in the book. There's 6 weeks when they're doing almost nothing. And wouldn't we all like to be in Italy in the 1980s with nothing to do other than lie in the sun? Uh, Call Me By Your Name is a really gorgeous, highly romantic and lovely novel. Uh, One last thing to mention is giving your partner, your romantic significant other, a bunch of flowers. And my equivalent of giving someone a bunch of flowers is to read this lovely book, which is like a bunch of flowers in itself, Small Pleasures by Claire Chambers, which is a very lovely, very quiet, very gentle love story. And it seems incredibly gentle, quiet, and uh, really quite insignificant in some ways, but it's absolutely devastating and packs an amazing punch. So it is, in many ways, like receiving a bunch of daffodils when you first get it and thinking, ooh, aren't they lovely? But as you slowly see them come into bloom, you will allow them to linger and be awestruck by them the longer that you gaze upon them. And I really love this book. It's all about, uh, it's kind of a love triangle. It's about a woman who thinks that she's had a virgin birth of her daughter, and another woman who comes to investigate that and find out if she really could have had a virgin birth. And then the two women get involved in a love triangle with the husband, who seems to be living in a sexless marriage. I don't have time to explain much more about it, but it's a gorgeous novel, quietly devastating, beautiful, and romantic. If you can't drink champagne with your lover, then you might want to read the literary equivalent of a bottle of champagne, The Princess Bride by William Goldman, which many of you also might know through the film. It's a really energetic, effervescent, fun, sparkly, romantic novel, which I would hugely recommend as a great read, the equivalent of a glass of Prosecco, bubbly, or champagne. I must mention, before coming to the end of this lovely romantic evening, that tomorrow night you all have the chance to join Damien Barr on a special evening where he's going to be interviewing Russell T Davies. You can buy a ticket on Eventbrite. It's only a fiver, and if you buy the ticket and miss the event, you can still watch it later on demand whenever you like. It's going to be a really fascinating evening. We've all been obsessed with It's a Sin, the brilliant TV series. Russell T Davies will be a fantastic person to meet via Damien Barr. And he's also going to be interviewing the amazing Ruth Coker Burks, who wrote a gorgeous book called All the Young Men, all about her experience of looking after people with AIDS in the 1980s in America. So do buy a ticket for that if you can. And also, if you have any questions that you'd like to put to either Russell or Ruth, you can send those questions in by email to megan@literarysalon.co.uk. I'll also put that on a post at the end of this session so that you can send messages if you like. So you could get your own questions out to Russell and Ruth if you send them in to Megan over the next 24 hours. So, or actually slightly less, 22 hours. So do that if you can, and join Damien tomorrow night on the special event. Get your tickets on Eventbrite. And next week, on my Facebook page, Elabertu, I will be looking at the best orgasms in literature, which I think is a rather great follow up to romance in literature. So join me for that on my Facebook page. Meanwhile, see you tomorrow night, I hope, on the fantastic Russell T Davies event with Damien Barr. And thanks for joining me this evening. Good night.